Hey guys, this is just a quick video about knife care. This is the knife that I was using the majority of the time in some of the videos that I've made previously. It got a little dirty. It's in pretty good shape, but I'm going to show you how to do a little bit of knife care to make sure that your knife is in tip-top condition after use. The first thing I usually do when I get home is I wash it, and that's pretty simple. Just get some warm water going, sponge, a little bit of mild soap, Dial or something along those lines will work just fine. We'll just give it a little bit of a light scrubbing, nothing too crazy. If you have pitch or anything like that from wood or some staining, just scrub it a little bit more. Part of the polishing process we're going to do at the end will also help with that. And we'll just rinse her off, just like so. And of course with a dry towel, we'll make sure it's nice and dry before we move on to the next step. Now remember that your knife may be a high carbon steel knife, even if it's not, even if it's technically stainless. If you leave it wet and sitting around, it will rust. You don't want that. So my recommendation is to make sure it's thoroughly dry before you store it. But we're going to move on to the next step, and the next step is going to be honing and restoring the edge. Okay, so now that your knife is clean, we'll move on to step 2 in knife care. A lot of you may have these sorts of knives, the Mora knives, or anything else that has a plastic sheath. It's not a bad idea to wash out the inside of your plastic sheath. If you do that, just make sure you dry it out really, really well before you put your knife back in. Obviously, if there's moisture in there, it's going to rust your blade, and that will corrode it, and you don't want that. So what I usually do when I get home after I've washed it is I'll take a good look at the edge. I'll try to determine if the edge is in good shape, how dinged up it is, if it's dinged up at all. In this case, it's in pretty good shape. I'm a little obnoxious about my knife care. I've always believed that if you're going to have a tool, you should treat it well. And if you treat it well, it'll treat you well. That's kind of the way I think about it. I also think about it like this. The more finely polished the edge of my knife is, the easier it's going to move through the material that I'm cutting. I think about it like sort of from a physics standpoint. I'm reducing drag and all that other kind of stuff that happens when you're carving wood and maybe processing some other materials like meats or so forth. I usually use this dude right here. This is a 4-sided strop. Each level of strop is a little finer. And it's used pretty simply. You just take your knife, put it on one edge, making sure it's flat. And the good thing about Scandinavian grinds is you can see exactly where the bevel needs to be, and you just drag back. I usually do about 20 or so. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side. But instead of using this, I'm going to show you a little trick. This is what I do in the field. I'll take a board and I'll take my belt. I always wear a leather belt. They're stronger and they're handy for keeping your knives sharp. Sort of feed it through. In this case, the knife is the belt is inside out. And I'm going to go ahead and get that on there nice and tight, but I'm going to make sure that the buckle's out of the way so I can put this flat, or as flat as I can get it. Move that a little bit further down. You sort of pull that back like so it's nice and tight. Now I can do the same thing that I was doing before. just like that. Very, very easy. We've got a really, really, really nice edge on our knife again. We'll see just how nice it is. Yeah. Baby's in good shape. Right on. So we've got a nice sharp knife. The last thing I do before I put my knife away is I'll take, in this case, I've got like a piece of old t-shirt. I try not to use like any nicer rags or anything like that. And I'm using cutting board oil because it's food grade. I will take a little bit of that. Just a little dab will do you. And I'll go ahead and rub that in to the steel. Remember, this is, in this case, this is an 01 tool steel, so it's high carbon. It's a really strong steel. It's great for knife blades, especially for carvers. We'll make sure that's rubbed in really, really well. And that's really going to help protect us from rust and acids and things that get into the knife from woods and plant materials and, you know, whatever else we might be processing. Just like that. The other thing that I might carry if I'm out in the field is wet dry sandpaper, a 400 and a 2000. You can take just a couple of these and you can use a little bit of pitch to glue them to a flat surface, like perhaps a piece of wood that you've flattened out. And then you can, essentially, you've given yourself a whetstone, but it's not a stone, it's sandpaper. And that's a handy thing. All right. The other thing that I was asked about were these guys. This is a chef steel. Chef steels, I don't recommend for carving knives. You can see how extreme the edge angle on a Scandinavian grind carving knife is, or a bushcrafter. It's a zero grind, whereas a chef's knife is a full flat, and it usually comes down to a slight convex edge. A chef steel, it's used by cooks, chefs, butchers to keep the edges of their knives that they're using all day, all the time, nice and honed throughout the day. But chef steels do remove material as you use them. So you are damaging your blade. I shouldn't say damaging, but you are removing material from your blade every time you use a chef steel. A lot of chefs, or even butchers, you'll see they'll do the crazy. I don't like to do that. I think it's a little wild. I usually do it just like I would with any other knife. I'll go ahead and give myself about 10, and then and then 10, and then I might just go the opposite direction just to hone it up a little bit. And my kitchen knives, like my bush knives, are nice and sharp and do whatever I need them to do. The last part of taking care of your knives, I will show you in just a moment. So the final part in taking care of your knives involves storage. Not everybody needs to have a crazy knife shelf like I have. I usually keep anything that normally would be in a leather sheath on my belt. I keep it out of the leather sheaths because leather sheaths tend to retain moisture. Pretty much anything that's in a plastic sheath, I do keep in the plastic sheath, and you know, machetes and things like that I also tend to keep in their sheaths. But for the most part, most of my nicer knives I tend to keep out of the sheaths to make sure that they're looking good and functioning well. And yeah, that's about it. So you just want to make sure that everything is nice and dry, nice and clean, and well oiled before you put it away. It's not too big a deal to do that kind of work. Yeah, but I hope you guys are doing well with the quarantine and all that kind of stuff, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.